Hello everybody and most welcome to H718. We are here south of Gothenburg in the lovely province of Halland actually. And we are having a light snowfall once again. And mind you, I don't think I've seen so much snow in early December for decades in Sweden. It's amazing. And it is, I would say, especially needed here in this dark period we are experiencing. Sundown is already at 3 o'clock, so it's a massive darkness and we really try to keep perky in this locomotion. I will today talk about how to develop direction or will. We mentioned that a lot earlier with the Alexander technique, and the direction is, in physical names, the force of the back. And it's a little bit like this: lack of force when I shut out what is around me, looks like slumped. And when I get in what is behind me and what is in front of me, and I start perceiving there is usually some sort of race, and what happens is my weight goes to my foot soles once more. I get contact with the floor. I feel that most definitely. And usually you can see that the body comes to life again. It's sort of dull before. And that is usually called direction. And of course it has to do with what you mentioned from William James earlier, thinking in action or ideomotor action. And that's the upward, I don't know what to call, force, direction, the sense of going somewhere, and this direction brings the body together, going up, up and widen at the same time. And to understand this, we need to, I think, that we need to get both a bodily understanding by practice. I mentioned in 716 about the idea of slowing down so the neuromuscular system will be able to read off the system. And this is something I experience more and more personally. It's a sort of knowledge. I see, why did I do that? Almost not verbally, almost directly learning I should not do that. And that's that off movement. It's too much tension, and I would say overreaction, because I wasn't aware earlier that it was an overreaction. If something fell down, the whole body tensed up in order to catch it or regulate it. And this is this direction coming in. And that's the bodily part. But we also need to get the thinking part, the mind part, the philosophical part, if you like. Because the understanding will also change your mind world. It goes hand in hand with everything being one whole. So the psyche is not something separate. It's part of the body / mind. And that's a complementarity. It's not 50-50. It's rather, let's say, 100%. So I think this could be very helpful. And I will start with a tough bit, and I will also here introduce no less than 2 new names. The first is the writer of this article I'm holding my hand, and it's difficult name, the union of 2 nervous system, neurophenomenology, ekinesthesia and the Alexander technique. It's a fantastic article, and she takes from so many areas, but I will for this instance use two names, her own name and a philosopher called Joseph Rouse. And since I read tiny paragraph of Joseph Rouse earlier, was many years ago, and I found it to be quite interesting. And now when his name is reappearing here, I start understanding a bit more, and that's a need. I also understood something that has been on my mind for a very long time. And I wrote like this: we are a totality, and that's the starting point. So we are all these connections, the social life, our career, our cultural upbringing, our hereditary traits, our family, the physical, if you like, environment, and so on. That makes up a whole. And until now, I did not have that much problem, and I don't think you, Kalle, and Henrik had a problem understanding what we've been mentioning before about forehanden. And that is usually slicing a piece of this cake, taking it out and sort of understand it disconnected, separate. And we often mention this glass ball, and you have something in the glass ball, and it doesn't have anything to do with the rest of the world. So that forehanden, I think we understood. But something I had a bit more trouble with is the Heideggerian expression, and also from Merleau-Ponty, already here, already in the world. As Heidegger said, in the Weltsein. And this was a bit tougher. But all of a sudden I felt that the possible need for the term must be in connection with forehanden somehow. And then I start thinking, maybe when we usually talk about time, talk about temporality, we are already using a sort of temporal forehanden. We're separating things from each other. And I think this idea came from the historical discussion we had at the party last night. And we count in different areas in the history of Gothenburg. And I noticed in my own thinking a separatedness. It was the 17th century, it was the 19th century, and they didn't seem to get together. And now in the morning it struck me, already here, it's a temporal non-forehanden. Already here, it's a temporal non-forehanden. It means that there's no temporal separatedness. You can't take a happening, separate it, and look at that only. Like we do when we read history. And the man I was talking with, he was a guide. I will also do some guiding pretty soon here. And of course, in the guiding experience, you need to do that. That's natural. That's nothing wrong with that. But time is not that in itself. You cannot slice out something and still think you have all what it takes to understand it. You have to have the whole time. And that's what Heidegger and Merleau-Ponty means with already here in the Weltsein. You've always been here. And Susan writes that too. It's important to understand we have always been in the world. It wasn't a time in our thinking, in our presencing, that we were not in the world. And that, of course, is a very important ontological decision. And you see here why I brought in this mind stuff, this philosophical stuff, in something that for most people seem to be so bodily. It's because if you keep that forehand, then you will do separation in mind, but also in the body at the same time. And that plays a vital role in getting back the direction, to making the direction forceful. Because if you do thinking divisions and thinking fragmentation, that will actually lessen the force of the direction. So that was a little about the theoretical but most important side. And now I will do a sort of first-hand resume of what Susan is writing in this article from my own point of view. And there could be said to be passiveness. We mentioned that before. We talk about we are just observers of the world. We are taken out of the context, both spatially and temporality. And we notice that because we lose this vivid vitality of presencing that is the characteristic trait of being in the world. It's fulfilled, it's juicy, it's meaty, and it's also surprising, spontaneous, all those traits. And this is at the same time a very characteristic lack of direction, or will, if you like. And it is like this object in space in front of subject that will gets banned or exorcised out of existence. Because when you have object in space in front of subject, there is no active observer at all. You are sitting at the theater. Your intentions, your direction does not matter. And you can almost visualize this. You're sitting at the theater and you start to slump. And the idea is that will not affect anything. The players in the theater, the object in space in front of subject, will still be going on somehow. You are just sitting there, and of course you lose your direction. You're not an active participant. And this is one of the most interesting things when it comes to this not participating. And things I found from Ian McGilchrist. I made a very quick short read of The Emperor's, the Master and His Emissary yesterday. And these sort of deadened descriptions are very absent both in the Iliad and the Odyssey. It's always people being active. It's almost like nature itself is active. It's like the sky is participating. It's active, it's verbal. Seldom you see that like one of the participants or characters in the drama are just sitting and taking notes of the world, because it's usually lacking in the descriptive when it comes to that, just saying how things is staying. Everything is still in the drama, in the hollow movement, in a constant flow, and you can feel the energy. I think that's the feeling when I read the Odyssey for the first time, even in English, I got a sense of movement. And that was enticing. And although I remember, the vivid description of a steady world that had become static, because I felt when I read other books that was an easy theater to step into when I was reading a book. That is not so much in these tales, but it's something else. It's an energy. It's a flow in the story that drags you up and gets you interested. And I wasn't in the end not missing the staticness, just in the beginning. Because we are adjusted to this slumping position, both mentally and corporally. So we almost crave it. So you see here, that's why it's so important with this loosening up of an object in space in front of subject to accompany that with a training of knowledge and intelligence and direction. And that means that sort of philosophy, science goes hand in hand with corporal training, direction. Because those two parts are separate, but they are also 100% together. So it's a little bit like quantum mechanics. Quantum wave and the particle, completely separated, completely different, having nothing to do with each other, but at the very same time, exactly one thing. And I should add, I think this one thing is the direction, because that brings together the mental side and the corporal side. And direction is almost like 100% mental, 100% physical. It's full. And this fullness that I think used to be the vividness in earlier time, in pre-Socratic time, and a flowing sensation of action and the whole body being vivid, thinking and acting at the same time. It's pretty obvious when you read this, when you speak about the heart doing things and the different fluids having both will and the capacity to be more corporal at the same time. It's rather fascinating, actually. And it's in this movement, in this hollow movement, we have knowledge too. It's actually the true foundation of knowing in the movement. The moving parts of our system, it comes together in the wave or the direction, like in Pfeiffer's robots, in a very perceptive and fantastic dancer like Fred Astaire. Everything comes together, and the energy is so strong even today, almost 80-90 years after that, seeing him dance and with a lightness to go to show it's a soul dancing. The lightness of the body shows everything heavy disappears in his movement. And I think that's also a very, very good description what it means to be in the world, as I explain here. And that is, you are participating in a communal, collective dance with the environment. And it's the movement that brings everything together. Your social part, your career part, your environment, the things in the world, What you do to eat, what you do for fun, everything is in a movement. And that's the unifying direction of everything that informs you and the world, and also at the same time constantly revitalizing everything. And it is exactly at this moment, this instance, your movement with your hands becomes more deliberate, more decisive. It's like you get precision into the movement. The motor capacity gets stronger, and will goes right out to the fingers. The fingers are no longer numb. And I was thinking, I've been like observing people, especially now in the cold, it's almost like their fingers are lacking direction or thinking. They're too clumsy, or the elegance that's needed for a specific movement. And this is also a very obvious knowing in the movement, an informed movement. And to explain that, it could be best to go to painting. I mentioned earlier, that was a long time ago, I learned a special technique, Renaissance painting with a specific brush called the Kolinsky brush. It's frightfully difficult. It's made from the tail of a mink, somewhere from the Siberia. And it's so long, it's incredible. You wonder how that poor mink moves about with this extra hair on his tail, long after the body ended. Apparently that helps the mink move about in snow, gives it direction. And oddly enough, in this tail there is a fantastic direction. In the hairs, they are made to give the brush an amazing capacity to direct your strokes in painting. But if you put a little extra force, if your thinking is not calm and precise, that brush won't give you anything. It will evaporate, go like this. And it was very hard to handle that brush. It was so different from the others that had bruteness to them, a shortness that made it possible for you to misuse your thinking and your movement. But one of my favorite painter, a Flemish painter called Rene, he used this long brush, and with this long brush he got a movement flowing right through the painting, and you could see it was a coherent movement from the very start to the end. And I remember one specific movement. My teacher, the old Søren, came to me and said, well, you know, Hans, these paintings that René made are often called Nachmittagstafel, afternoon paintings. And I wondered, why is that? I was thinking maybe it's something that you look at in the afternoon. No, it's called that way because they usually only took an afternoon to make. And I think by that time I've been trying on this copy, there's replica of René, for 5 months. And he did it in one afternoon. And he most probably used this brush. And this goes to show, when you got this elegance, this specificness, you will find a speed you never felt before. Because everything needs to be together to have that preciseness. And this usually slow pace, as Alexander called it, that we normal people have, it's because we can't direct sufficiently. We need to do it in this half pace. And this half pace could be actually quite stressed, because when we're not doing anything, the system gets stressed. We cannot fulfill our actions, which is very important for us human beings. We want to do things. We want to get them right. And instead, we get new clumsy tools. We can't do that with that precision. And I realize now, many years later after this class, that this is one of the reasons. We have a mental separation, and we usually don't care about this mental separation. We think, well, I can develop my body separately somewhere. And then I realize, no, it comes together. This forehand and deal is part of what I'm self-doing, and it's part of the problem. Use forehanden when you do a guided tour when it comes to time. Use forehanden if you're in the laboratory or you want to explain something very, very specific about the carburetor in a car. But if you start using this oversimplified tool, I would say, in your daily life, it will cause so much problems, because the world is not that tool. It's a lure of technology in some way, a sort of specific type of crude perception of technology that's not correct. And here in this, I would say there is also a feedback system, that the wholeness can read out itself. And that comes to the method we mentioned before. I won't go into that too much, but by slowing down, the system can read off itself, and it will heal. And the reason for that is the body is, in certain way, always a wholeness. It cannot be anything else, because it's in the world. And it doesn't matter you have all these divisions and fragmentization, because the body in a certain way is always whole, will always remain whole, because it's in the world. So part of the solution is letting the body into the project, and that will actually be enough. It's here in the body that the contradictions get deconstructed, so to speak, and everything gets healed. And it's not like the distinctions disappears. It's that there can be distinctions, and at the same time be a wholeness that gives direction upwards, widening. And this is mighty positive, because that means that every time you train, you will get a little bit stronger. And we also need to understand the process to put it very, very firmly into our system. It will always develop as long as you stick to the schedule, the routine, the method. Because the wholeness will heal everything. And what will happen by time, and it's already happened with me, I see progression, I feel progression, but I cannot consciously connect that to what I'm doing, for obvious reasons. Non-duality is still abundant. That's how I talk, that's how we all talk. We sit at the dinner party. The usual method of talking is duality, and that will do that you don't understand where the progression is coming from. But that's the second reason this is so important to stick to your mind, that the wholeness is where it's coming from, and it's your willingness to get closer to that wholeness that will give you the direction and the extra stamina and strength. So that's the second reason, and as important as the first reason, to really stick to the understanding, the knowledge why it is. And this last thing is something you just need to remember, because it will not be into the body until much later, and then you're already safe. This, for now, it's important to stick to this. And I think that's actually sums it up pretty good. I say thank you very much and have a very pleasant afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you.